Well, welcome everybody. Like Josh said, my name is Mandy Watson. I am a fur bearer biologist based out of our Albany office. Um, and I'm just going to kind of start off with kind of a brief overview, just going through what exactly a fur bearer is. And I would just like to say, as we go through this presentation today, please feel free to ask any questions, put them in that Q&A button that you have to all panelists, and we're happy to answer them. All right, so, what is a fur bearer? This is a question that we get a lot, not actually a bear. And what it is it's just a general term that's used to describe species that have historically been hunted or trapped primarily for their fur. And here in New York and throughout the country, fur bearers are a very diverse group of species. So in New York, we have our semi-aquatic fur bearers, which are those that spend time on land and in water, and that includes beavers, river otters, mink, muskrats. We also have our, what I like to refer to as our, backyard fur bearers. So the ones that you're likely to see in more suburban areas and that I'm sure most folks are familiar with, such as the raccoon, skunk, striped skunks, the Virginia opossum as well. And then we have our land-dwelling mustelids, which are part of the weasel family. So we have our fisher and our American marten, as well as both long and short-tailed weasels. And then we have our canids. So we've got the eastern coyote, we have gray foxes, red foxes, and finally we have our one wildcat species, the bobcat. Um, so it's just kind of a quick overview of all of the fur bearers that we have here in New York. And, as I mentioned, really the one thing that ties all of these species together, it's a very diverse group, a lot of differences there, but the one thing that ties them together is that these species are all highly valued by trappers. So for their fur, but also for other things as well. As I'm sure many of you know, we have a long history of trapping in New York, and you really can't talk about fur bearer management without talking about regulated trapping. So our state was built on beaver trapping. However, the trapping of today looks very different than it did way back when. So trapping today is highly regulated. So it can only be done by licensed trappers. So they have to have a valid trapping license. They have to have completed a mandatory trapper education course as well. All laws and regulations are enforced by environmental conservation officers. And we here at DEC are the main part of our job here is continuously reviewing and developing rules, regulations, recommendations, education programs, and so on that really consider the most up-to-date science on trapping and our fur bearers and that take into account animal welfare and things like that. And really the most important thing is that all of these fur-bearing species in New York, even though many of them are elusive and not seen very often, they are all abundant species. So trapping is only done on species that are abundant. We very closely monitor our trapping harvest and our fur-bearer populations to ensure that these species are going to be around for generations to come. And regulated trapping has many benefits. So, trapping is a legitimate use of the wildlife resource. So it is, trappers will use many different parts of the animals. It's not all about the fur. They will also they may use the fur for clothing. They'll use the meat. They use scent glands, things like that. So really these animals are used. And trappers view trapping as a historic part or an important part of their heritage and a way to remain connected to the outdoors. But for some other benefits as well, is trapping can be very useful for reducing conflicts with wildlife. So, in New York, we have a very robust beaver population. We get a lot of issues with beaver, conflicts with beaver that are being reported from flooding, breaking of dams, taking out roads, buildings, property, things like that. And so trapping is used to help mitigate some of these conflicts. Some other examples might be coyotes or raccoons that may be damaging property. Um, and another thing is that trapping of predators can actually help protect some endangered species. So it's, piping plovers, if we have anybody down in region 1 on Long Island, where predators can do a number on those nesting birds, trapping is really, really relied heavily on to protect those populations. And another really big thing with trapping that a lot of folks may not think about is it is critical for our research and reintroduction programs as well. So in New York, we reintroduced river otters, which I'll be talking a little bit about later. And almost all of those otters that were moved, so it was 279 otters that were moved primarily from the eastern part of the state, mostly in the Adirondacks in the northern zone, were trapped by volunteer trappers who went out and set live traps for these otters, and then we moved them to the western part of the state as part of this reintroduction program. And we also rely very heavily on trappers for many of our research projects that we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to be talking about bobcats and fishers and some of the recent research that DEC has been doing. And trappers have been absolutely critical in helping us really get our hands on these animals and put out collars and things like that you'll hear a lot more about later on in the program. Um, and it's also just really important. It gives us a really good data source on getting information about some of these more elusive critters that we don't necessarily get to see that often. So, we have asked trappers multiple different times to submit different parts of the animals that they trap, whether it be their carcasses, teeth, things like that. And then we can do a whole number of different sampling and stuff on that. We can get an idea of age structure from the teeth. We've had trappers submit reproductive tracks so that we know how many young they may be having and how often these different animals are having young. It's really, really important for us as biologists. It gives us a really important resource here. And so, I mentioned that both trapping and our fur species are very closely monitored by us at DEC. And this is just kind of a broad overview of how we collect some of that information, how we use it. So we do have a lot of what we call harvest dependent information. So this is stuff that we get directly from trappers and fur hunters. So if we have any trappers in the audience, I'm sure you know that we send you a lot of different things, surveys and whatnot. And we really, really appreciate that. And we do really use that data. So some of the things that we do is we have pelt sealing. So we have mandatory sealing. So a DEC staff member has to go out and manually put on a plastic tag on all harvested bobcats, river otters, American marten, and fisher. So we can very closely track the harvest of those species. For our other species, we will track harvest through an annual trapper mail survey. So we send out a survey to 4,500 different trappers, which we average about 14,000 trappers in the state. So this is a very big sample of our trappers, asking folks to report what species they trapped, how many they trapped, and also their effort. So this gives us a really good idea of, take per unit effort. So we can use that to kind of get an idea of how our populations may be doing. And for some of our species, like the American marten, we will actually even more closely track effort by having trappers fill out what's known as activity logs, where they go out and they say how many traps they set for how many nights and what they caught and when. And that just really helps us understand trapping or trapping harvest and these different populations much better. And like I mentioned previously, we will also request samples from certain harvested animals as well that we can then use to test for a myriad of different things or to learn more about. One of the things we have going on right now is we collected carcasses from harvested fishers and gray foxes last year. And we have sent those, so this is part of a northeastern study, a regional study, and we've sent those samples to a group of wildlife veterinarians and pathologists who are doing really comprehensive health screening. They're looking for the presence of anticoagulant rodenticides in these animals, for different heavy metals in these animals, and also testing for different diseases. So we're hoping to have results from that. But that's just kind of one example of one of the things that we can do here when we are asking, like with the cooperation of trappers who are fantastic. Um, and then we also have what's known as harvest independent data as well. So these are not reliant on folks actually trapping the animals. And this includes things such as observation reports. So there's that QR code there. And if you scan that, that brings us to, or that will bring you to our Furbearer Public Sighting Survey, which is a survey asking members of the public to report sightings of certain fur-bearer species that they may see, and they can upload pictures and videos. We have gotten over 1,400 reports since this survey went live just about a year ago, which has been really great. And that is really, really helpful for helping us understand more about where some of these rare species are and their habitat use and behavior in some of these like urban and suburban areas that we don't necessarily get that much information from. And then another one is just dedicated research projects. So, this could include things such as camera surveys, track and sign surveys, going out to see what we can detect, mark recapture surveys, which can be used to estimate just how many animals are out there, putting VHF or GPS collars on the animals to get a better idea of how they're moving, things like that. And so, that's just kind of an example of some of the different things. We're going to be talking a lot more about some of this stuff, particularly some of our harvest independent research that we've been doing. But if you want to know more about really everything that we're doing with fur bearers that we may not have time to cover tonight, I would recommend that everybody check out our Fur Bearer newsletter. So this is an annual newsletter that DEC's Fur Bearer management team puts out. We just released this fall version a couple weeks ago. So this is all new. You can either scan that QR code and it will bring you right to this newsletter, or you can follow that link on the screen, and that will bring you to our trapping page, which you can then find. There's a little box, a call out box for that newsletter. So if you want to read anything more about our harvest numbers or, the data from those activity logs and whatnot, I highly recommend you guys check that out.